Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session today, the future of identity governance and access management. So I have Bradley with me. I have Mr. Peter Ejiofor and Goodness Opani. So I would like our speakers to introduce themselves as we begin. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth. My name is Peter Ejiofor. I work for Ethnos, and then, yeah, that's my introduction. Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth. I hope you can hear me very clearly. Good afternoon to all the delegates that have joined us this afternoon. And this is Goodness Opani, the one leading the technical team in Ethnos. Over to you, Bradley.
Thanks, Goodness.
I don't know if Bradley can hear us.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Bradley.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Bradley Dupree. I'm a sales and solution engineer for One Identity. I'm residing in South Africa, and I look after the sub-Saharan region. Thanks again.
So thank you to all our panelists. So at this point, I would like Mr. Peter Ejiofor to take us through what we should be expecting in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Am I audible? Because my camera just turned off. Can you? Yeah, thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
My camera just turned itself off. I have no clue why.
Yeah, happens.
But I'd like to welcome every one of you to this Future of Identity webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Wherever you are around the world, it could be morning, it could be afternoon, whichever one it is, we welcome you. This webinar is being put together by the combined effort of Ethnos and then One Identity Quest, two global security companies working together in partnership to help solve real security problems. And today we are looking at the future of identity. I'm sure some of you must have heard the saying that data is the new gold. But it will interest you to know that identity is the gateway to that data, to that new gold. So for you to get to that gold, you have to address identity. Identity does not just identify you, but it enables recognition. It also enables memory, reactions to people's, places, organization, and objects. And so this is why the question of identity has become very central and critical on the journey of technology and then, of course, cyber threats, which is why our speakers today are going to help us to uncover the indispensable role of identity systems in managing relationships that permeate nearly every aspect of our existence, both in the physical and digital ecosystems. And so the future of identity and governance, excuse me. And so the future of identity is going to be looking at governance around this identity and access to your identity. The speakers are also going to look at the identity threats and how to mitigate these threats, because the identity threats is real, and in the future of development, when you're looking at AI and ML, you're going to be looking at how the identity impacts on these areas. So, excuse me. So whether you are a practitioner Hello, can you mute yourself? Can you help us mute this? Yeah, thank you very much. So whether you are a practitioner of technology and security, or you're just an enthusiast, or you are executive that makes decisions that impact on the security of the organization and the people, this webinar promises to enrich you to understand the criticality of identity in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. So I thank you again for joining, and I look forward to gaining new knowledge from these experts. I look forward to discovering new things from these experts, and that's what I also expect you to open up your mind and your heart to learn what they have to offer to you. But I believe that at the end of the day, you become better, richer, and more equipped to protect your identity and to protect your enterprises from the rapidly growing identity threats. So, Elizabeth, thank you for the opportunity, and then I wish all of you very impactful session. And then at the end of the day, I'm sure we're going to take some questions and answers. And then if you have more questions that we couldn't address after this event, we'll be more than happy to address it after the event. Send us an email, and then we will be there to respond to you. Thank you all very much. And then let's listen to the panelists. So Elizabeth, back to you.
Yeah, so thank you so much, sir, for that introduction. So you've been able to give us a brief to what we'll be expecting. We understand the importance of identity in security these days because of the way the whole system is currently. So today's session will be divided into 3 segments to make it easier. And after each segment, we'll be taking questions. The first segment will be about identity as the new security perimeter. Then we'll move to the ineffectiveness of the traditional identity and access management solutions. Then we'll round it off with practical approach to identity governance. So we'll be taking questions at the end of each session. So when we ask our panelists questions and they answer, and you have questions from what they said, or you have other questions relating to the subject we are discussing at the moment, we'd like you to drop your question in the chat box and we'll be glad to answer. So once again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Goodness. Thank you, Bradley. And thank you, Peter. So I'll start with the first question. Talking about identity as the new security perimeter, we know that in the quest to protect organizations' infrastructure and data, a lot of security technologies such as web application firewalls and network firewalls have been put in place. So, Goodness, I'll start with you. Why do you think organizations should focus on the protection of identities as a new security perimeter? We cannot hear you.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. All
right, thank you. So I spoke about, I mean, this is a very interesting topic, conversation. I mean, identity as the new security perimeter. We have conversations with organizations, and one of the conversations around security is edge to end. So from perimeter all the way to the end being, as Peter mentioned, data as the new gold. And in the history of protection, right, of organizations implementing security, focus has always been on putting in place perimeter security. So you have things like your web application firewall, you have things like your network firewall. Of course, firewall has also evolved to now become next generation firewall with some form of intrusion detection and prevention systems. And all of this perimeter technology, security perimeter technologies have worked, all right? it has worked for a while when there was clear separation between people who are inside and those who are outside. So you have users inside, people who are clearly defined as those working for the organization, and those who don't work for the organization, those on the outside. And in fact, even when we had remote workers, we talked about how you can, create tunneling or VPN for people to pass through the firewall and enter into the system, and to also have access to everything. But the truth is that in the modern IT environment, we don't just have we don't have just inside users. We have remote workers. We have third-party vendors. We have offices in distributed locations. We have mobile cloud and deployments of applications. The typical perimeter no longer exists. So there is no perimeter, so to say, or that delineation between outside and inside. Today, people are everywhere accessing everything at any time. So that has warranted the focus or the shift in security from just focusing on what we will call the traditional perimeter security to a better way of identifying, or a better way of protecting the organization. And there is no other way of protecting an organization than to focus now on identities. Now, identity can be anything, because it's actually everything. We have user identities, we have devices as an identity, we have applications as an identity. In the past, when it comes to identity, typically you just have username and password that we use to enter and log onto a particular system or a particular application or what have you. But then again, we now have various types of systems, applications, or things assuming identities and trying to access. In the past too, when we speak about breaches, typically when a user is within the network, or user trying to access the particular firewall for it to enter the network. Today, no attacker wants to even try to break a firewall, so to say, because he wants to access a particular organization's data. No, that's so complex, that is so huge. For the focus for cyber attackers now is to focus now on just assuming an identity, a trusted identity that you trust, that the organization trusts. And then once the attacker identifies or assumes a particular identity, because you trust that identity, whether it's a user identity, whether it's a device identity, an application identity, the attacker can be able to pivot. The attacker can be able to create his presence at different points within the system. So network firewalls, web application firewalls, network firewalls are no more safe perimeters when it comes to perimeter security. The focus is now on identities, and the protection of identities has now become the focus for security conversations when it comes to protection of the organization's data.
Thank you so much, Goodness. Yeah, you said so much, and we'll be coming back to you. So Bradley would like to hear from you.
No problem, Goodness. So I agree with Goodness, right? He's on point there. Identity is the new parameter, right? But how I like to look at this question is more adding a bit of history, right? So if you look at where IAM basically started, like was in the 1960s when IBM developed RACF, right? Resource Access Control Facility, for their mainframe systems. A lot of banks still use it today. And fortunately enough, IAM solutions integrate with it, right? So the intent behind RACF was to provide a centralized authentication and access control mechanism for mainframe users, right? And then in the 1980s, we saw distributed computing. So in turn, this led to the need of IAM systems that can or could manage your identities and access across multiple systems and platforms. So this resulted in LDAP getting released, right, and directory services. In the 1990s, we saw the advent of web-based applications and the intent of internet going mainstream. This led to the development of identity federation standards such as your SAML and OpenAuth, right? So basically, this gives the administrators the ability to manage access across different domains, systems, and enables the user to authenticate and authorize access to web applications. In the 2000s, we now saw that we are merging to cloud computing and more reliance on mobile devices, which created more and more challenges for IAM administrators concerning the access management for resources not on premise, right? Just like some of the points Goodness just raised now. So this resulted in the introduction of cloud-based IAM solutions, which has grown further over the last several years. And obviously, cloud computing and digital transformation became mainstream. So in contrast to the old way of doing things, right, the new identity-centric module allows you to harden the privilege instead of the endpoint. You're ensuring that all your identities are correlated and visible because you want a more consistent view, right, across your people, your applications, and your data, but your identity is still the center. So now you can have the ability to remove friction with better integration and manage your identities more consistently, okay? And you will now have the ability to actually better or remove and add or adjust the privilege just in time, right? So we're talking all of these concepts. But if you look at how all of them came now into play, right? Identity or identity governance platforms such as Identity Manager has the ability to tie into all of these directories which is mentioned that was in the past with your LDAP systems, your directory services, that was seen as your single source of truth, and a lot of applications integrating with them for authentication and authorization. Also the ability to tie into applications and databases as well as mainframe systems, right? Tying it into one and having that one central place where we're managing your identities. And then obviously tie into access management in terms of giving users the ability to gain access to applications sitting in the cloud or on premise. This introduces things like single sign-on MFA and obviously creates a whole different conversation. But how all these now from the past has now come together and now actually fits into one umbrella where we now to actually achieve this unification or move from that fragmented approach and shift to managing the identity, having the ability to tie all that back to identity becomes much more simpler, and you actually have the ability to verify everything before actually granting it. So I think it puts us in a much better position in terms of having control within our organization, having better understanding of what access our users have, what they're doing with that access. And he helps us answer those difficult questions. So I thought that basically also opens up our minds more of where it also came from. Because if you look at it today, identity is the common denominator across your location agnostic access points, your devices, your networks. You're enabling organizations to holistically authenticate and authorize, as well as manage your users, your things, and your systems, just like Goodness mentioned. And building this new security perimeter, we must include the likes of SSO and MFA, as well as contextual user behavior. But I'm sure we will be touching on that going further into this session. But yeah, that's where my understanding is, and obviously to add on to your question that you have asked.
Yes, thank you so much, Bradley. You've touched a lot of major points. Now, when Goodness was speaking, he mentioned something. He said, people are everywhere at any time, accessing everything at any time. So it means there is no longer restriction for organizations. That's where we have remote workers coming in. You know, through COVID, a lot of things changed. When COVID came in place, organizations had to start re-strategizing. So a lot of organizations that could not adapt to better operational strategies made losses. And we had organizations introducing remote system or hybrid system of working. So to keep up. Then when the remote system and hybrid system came in place, it became more common for workers to access important infrastructure at different places. So they did not have to come to the office. As Goodness said, they were everywhere at any time. So that will take us to the next question that says, do you think that the remote or hybrid work system that became more popular during COVID and then the adoption of cloud services are part of the factors that have contributed to the emergence of identity as a security perimeter? So I would like Bradley to go first.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, it definitely did contribute, and also helped us push, especially for me in South Africa, pushed us to actually adapt to it much more quicker. As you know, it was quite easy working from one place like the office bound, where you're connecting to one central place. You're always on the network. But in today's life, we have this remote working, right? The pandemic, unfortunately enough, pushed us to that point in time. So you need to adapt, right? We need to move with this movement as the organizations are moving. Us as identity security professionals need to adapt and assist our customers to actually make sure they feel secure, right? So if you look at how users are still trying to interact with our application sitting internally, right? You should still have the ability to manage those identities, have the ability to manage even your customer base, right? It's not just your internal users, right? These identities can have multiple accounts linked to them at the end of the day, right? So the focus is to manage that identity, manage the access the user has to the applications, and give them the ability to access these applications from virtually anywhere. And we've seen this with access management solutions, like, for example, with OneLogin. So we have the ability to have this solution as an identity as a service sitting in the cloud, and has the ability to integrate with multiple directories within your environment, whether you have directory services such as AD or an LDAP system, for example, and other cloud directories out there. So you have the ability to integrate with them, bring in those identities, manage them in one central directory, or still have the ability to have your other solutions authenticate and authorize against those solutions, but still have the ability to have that consistency across the board. So what then happens is, once we have the ability to manage this user, and remember, they still can access these solutions from their mobile devices, their PCs, because it's available on the web interface, right, on the web browser. So when the user is created and managed, we're making sure that we provision the certain access that this user should have. We can now enable things like single sign-on and MFA to enhance the security of your application sitting internal to your network, right? You can do things like application provisioning. So it has pushed us to a point where we needed to adapt and shift in terms of managing identities, whether it's internal or external to the organization, as well as your customer base sitting within your organization. So managing them, giving them access to applications sitting internal to network, and then even having the ability to talk to other internal applications, which is very important. Because if you look at, for example, PAM, right? It doesn't say that just because I'm a third-party vendor, I'm not going to try and access your system from external, okay? I still need to have things in place that can help me access specific applications with privileged credentials, and it should still be secure. If you look at how these solutions should talk to one another, for example, if we use OneLogin with a PAM solution, you must utilize that contextual user behavior, or you leverage off of the risks policies that are sitting in these access management solutions. So if something malicious does occur in the downstream application, we're making sure that we can utilize that to our benefit in terms of marking the user as a high risk or medium risk, or changing the user's login flow automatically. So in that way, we are being more proactive in stopping any malicious activity and still providing that access from users coming from external. Okay, it's just some of the ways you can look at it.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you. So we'll go to Goodness now. Goodness, what do you think?
Okay, hi. I mean, good points. I hope you can hear me anyway. So good points from Bradley. I mean, that perspective was a lot on how one identity handles that. And again, if you take a look at what you just mentioned, I mean, we are coming from COVID-19 and the impact on cybersecurity. One of the things that you to better understand that impact is good to look at statistics. Okay, the National Cybersecurity Center published that before COVID, we had generally within the United States alone between 1,000 to 1,500 cyber attacks. Now, just between 2019 and the mid-COVID period, April 2020, that's increased by 50%. So we now had more cyber attacks compared to what was the norm. Okay. Now there is the funny thing in the cyber attacks that have happened is that the cyber attacks changed. What the context and the content in which cyber attacks happen for organizations. So there was now because again organizations have to start to create. We're not really ready for the COVID that came in. They had to start to create policies for people to not just work from home, but also stay at home. But in creating this technology, one of the things that they failed to realize was that it did not create a secure environment for people to actually work from home. So again, the cyber threat landscape changed. You find out that you now have employees who are working from home, inside employees who are malicious. Of course, you have insider fraud, insider threats, malicious employees who are working from home with less supervision and fewer technical controls, who will now be tempted to carry out one fraudulent or criminal activity or the other. You have cyber criminals who understand that data, there are no proper data security measures in place, or they're not fit for purpose to sufficiently protect the people working from home. And that's why most of the cyber attacks became successful. You find that you now have cyber security, cyber attack as a service. So we have identity as a service, you have software as a service. You now even have to let's see trends like cyber attack as a service. One major thing that came up most of the time were ransomware attacks. Before a person carries out a successful cyber attack, he must be technically savvy. He must be technical savvy. He must know how to develop the scripts that we're able to push out there to be able to compromise either user systems. But now it is provided as a service. So you just go to the dark web, pay some sort of money, and it can be provided to you, sometimes even at a very discounted rate. So all of these were the trends that came out. And the common factor across each of these different cyber attacks was the fact that the focus was not on trying to break into the typical firewall, or trying to break into a web application firewall, this perimeter security solutions. The focus was really just to do as little as just compromising a user identity. And as it as that, I compromise your identity, I can use that particular identity to log on to just about anywhere. And so these are some of the things, the trends that have happened over time, coming from COVID-19. A lot of people are coming back to work, okay? But then there are still these remote working practices that we are still not left. So you have people having to alternate between working in the office and working remotely. You have people who have not even come back at all. And then you have people who are fully come back, but are still having one or more systems in-house that they can use to log on to. They have devices at their place, at their home, where they can use to log on to organizational resources. Then there is also cloud adoption. Because of the COVID-19, we had more than 80% increased adoption across the world. In Nigeria here, we have more and more businesses who are adopting more and more cloud services. The number of customers by the different cloud service providers increased rapidly. And so again, because people were able to stay at anywhere and access different resources, the number of cyber attacks focused on compromised user identities became high. So again, like you rightly mentioned, the increase of cloud adoption and coming out from COVID-19 and the fallout from this COVID-19 has actually had a major impact on the focus for organizations to not start to think about these restrictions on the typical traditional perimeter security, but now to focus on protection of user identities. And like Bradley mentioned, all of it is brought forward by One Identity have been put forward to carry out those protections.
Wow, thank you so much, Goodness and Bradley, for your contributions. So I think at this point, I would ask the audience if they have questions. Currently, I've not seen any question in the chat box, so I'll give like 2 minutes for questions. If you have any question regards what they said. They already spoke about the introduction of identity and the importance of identity as a new security perimeter. And they mentioned several points talking about the adoption of remote and hybrid work models, and then cloud security, a lot of things. So if you have questions concerning anything they mentioned, please, I would like you to drop your question in the chat box. We have just 1 minute left for that. Okay, so we'll not take our time. I would say we move to the next segment. If you have questions, you can still drop your question. I will always go back to the question. So now we are moving to the ineffectiveness of traditional identity and access management solutions. We've reaffirmed that identity is the new security perimeter, and identity is important. It is important to safeguard identities, and it is important to effectively use identity to secure our infrastructures. So now I would ask, what are the key limitations of traditional identity and access management solution in today's technological landscape? So, Goodness. Yes, can you hear me?
All right, thank you. I hope you can hear me too, because I'm having difficulties trying to.
Elizabeth, I can go take it along while Goodness just sorts out his mic.
Okay, please, let's have Bradley while Goodness sorts it. I think there's a network issue. Okay, Bradley, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So for me, the main value, right, that emerged from the identity and access management as a whole is the unification, right? A lot of solutions out there has the ability to do certain things. As you know, IAM suite is made out of a few core components like PAM, like access management, like governance and administration, and they all come together, right? But at the moment, it's most of the time fragmented. And I think it actually was mentioned in Gartner that in the year 2025, most vendors or OEMs will be shifting to converged platforms, and a lot of customers are seeing this already, right? Yes, it's fair and well. It gets you on a nice point to have a solution in place to, for example, take care of your privileged accounts or perform things like access management in terms of providing MFA and single sign-on to applications and so forth, and managing the life cycle of users. But at the end of the day, it's not enough, right? It gets us there, but it's not enough. We need to add to that. And I think this is where some IAM solutions are ineffective, right? Because it has the limitation of not talking or integrating with other solutions. And that's where the major value comes from vendors such as One Identity, because we have the ability to do deep integration with our own technology space, right? So when we integrate with the likes like PAM, we introduce something called privileged account governance. This does not exist on a normal PAM platform. You do not have the ability to manage a life cycle of a privileged account, right? So, for example, someone like me as a support engineer comes into your organization and I need access to a specific privileged credential. Somebody will create me on the PAM solution and give me access to that privileged credential. But what happens when I shift to a different location or I leave the organization? Somebody needs to physically log on manually and delete me, right? All of this should be part of automation fulfillment, right? You should have things in place that can make sure you're still achieving continuous governance and compliance. So if you have an IGA solution put in place, which has all of these feature sets, PAM just becomes another downstream application to manage, which means I have control. I'm managing that system. So, for example, I create a user as a support engineer. He needs access to certain credentials. When I create that user, automatically he will be provisioned in the PAM platform and get access to specific accounts that he needs to. I can then enforce a lot of features such as segregation of duty, recertification campaigns. I can utilize just-in-time access as well. So if risk policies increase, we can kick off a policy and make sure that we having someone attest to someone having that access. Or if somebody has too much access, what do we do about it, right? And that becomes so important, especially when you talk to PAM, because users in today's organizations has too much privileges, right? And this is one of the reasons why we have these identity cyber attacks, because hackers come in, gain access to your network via whatever spam they utilized, and they gain access to a privileged account and move laterally in your organization. So if you have that privileged credential taken down, locked away in the vault, have the ability to have the insight what to do with them, and then extend that further to governance, you already far ahead of a lot of organizations, because you're making sure you're achieving governance and compliance, and you are getting on that zero trust path, because I'm providing credentials just in time. I'm giving you the ability to enforce governance and compliance to PAM, for example, and users won't be able to gain access to their credential, because we are always rotating the credential, we are managing the credential. And even if you take it further, like just in time with ARS, active roles, you now have the ability to do just-in-time elevation of the privileged account. So the account doesn't pose a risk in the organization if it is not utilized. It is stripped away from its security group and disabled. So already now, when somebody tries to gain access to it, yeah, you can get access to the account, but it has no security groups linked to it, and it's in a disabled state. You understand? So there's a lot of ways that you are being proactive and already ticking a lot of boxes off of your list, making sure that you're getting on a more zero trust path in that way.
Thank you so much, Bradley. I can see 3 questions here already. So before we take the questions we have, I'd like Goodness to give his contribution.
Okay, so apologies for the network, another network issues I'm having here. So I mean, we're talking about traditional IAM systems, and I was mentioning that IAM solutions did not begin today. We have always had them. It's just that they have always been inefficient in protecting user identities, and the reason is, again, linked back to what we talked about, the fact that in the past the IAM solutions were built specifically for protecting on-premise workloads. Okay, so most times you have people who are working on-prem in an office, and that's the typical IAM solution that you have. So you have your AD, of course, Active Directory as one of the initial first identity and access management solution that you have. But again, as time went by, as time goes on, we found out that a lot of key factors have changed. A lot of factors have changed over time. We are now having more and more developers who are adopting more and more development methodologies. So no more are we focusing on running a typical traditional way of carrying out development. Most people are now implementing DevOps practices for working to deliver services faster. They are now interfacing with different systems, and we have had the increased use of APIs. So we are no more focusing now on monolithic applications as a way of building applications where you just have your front end, a blank front end, you have the back end, and the front end also speaking to the back end. That kind of application, monolithic applications. Developers have gone beyond that. Developers are now building very complex applications that are now interconnecting each other using APIs. So we are now having more and more APIs that have become more and more prevalent. So every single application today that you are holding, whether you're from the fintech, today fintechs are consuming banks APIs, banks are consuming fintechs APIs, healthcare sector are consuming other APIs. So you just have APIs everywhere, because modern organizations now are API first, and even most times API only. Applications are now being assembled and exchanging data with external authenticators like your Okta, Auth0, using Salesforce and all of that. So because of the dynamic way applications, and again, I'm speaking specifically because of the fact that we are looking at identities, not just as a user, as a person logging onto a system. We're looking at identities even from applications, because applications too have their own identities. Okay, we are looking at devices, my laptop, your laptop, as assuming its own identity using to log on to a particular resource that you have. So traditional IAM solutions focused on those on-premise workloads, the way applications were, those monolithic approach, they fall short of protecting applications that have now become complex, actually APIs now that will require access to that will need to be able to access different resources, applications using APIs to access other applications to access resources. What has now happened is, because of the complexity of these APIs, we now need to have a more adaptable and more scalable IAM solution that is able to adapt frequently, very, very quickly to the way developers work. And that's one. The second thing that we have seen recently is also with regard to scalability. Okay, so again, you're having more and more people who are joining the organization. You're having more and more people who are accessing resources. The typical IAM traditional solution, we just was able to just carry out access management for just a few resources. When organizations begin to scale up in terms of their needs, because their needs are always dynamic, you find that IAM solutions will always fall short of such scalability, the traditional IAM solution. So again, that's necessitated the need for us to have a more scalable IAM platform. Attack surface too is growing. So now organizations are working in distributed environments. Before, if you want to access a corporate file, for example, you say this corporate file is only for a DMD, a deputy manager director, or managers alone. You find that your IAM solution will be configured to just allow only managers to access that particular file. But today, the attack surface has grown. So you will have a Spotify app, for example, requesting to confirm a user's identity through another app like Facebook. So people are no longer, if you have a customer site, a site where you have customers, but your customers should be able to log on to your site using another application like your Facebook, like your Gmail, and that's what they call identity federation. So these are some of the new and advanced technologies, things that are coming up, increasing the attack surface that your typical traditional IAM solutions cannot be able to meet up, and that necessitates the need for have a more better, scalable, and more fit for purpose identity access management solution.
Thank you so much, Goodness and Bradley. Like, yes, I think from what you said, we've been able to understand that the major issue with these solutions is the lack of flexibility and the fact that they may not be able to suit remote work and the new structure of mobile applications like APIs and all of that. So I think at this point we have to move faster than before because we are almost running out of time. So I'll quickly move to the second question that says, what are the challenges around regulatory compliance frameworks that organizations face when implementing IAM solutions, and how can these challenges be navigated? So Bradley, would you please help us with that question?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so look, at the end of the day, regulatory compliances such as SOX for GDPR, CCPA, etc., they can all be challenged, especially in a distributed environment and where data is stored across multiple locations and jurisdictions, right? So you need to have solutions in place that can help you achieve this or help you achieve governance and compliance and meet these regulatory compliance standards that has been pushed down. Okay, so basically, for example, if you look at how some of these solutions actually assist you in getting there, and they do. So, for example, if you look at Identity Manager, it has a lot of features that is put in place that can help you achieve governance and compliance. If you think about your current deployment module, right, whether you're on premise, whether you're in the cloud, whether you have identities internal or external, whether you have different types of identities such as things or robotics, it doesn't matter. All of these things need to be managed. All of them need to you need to have the ability to provide continuous governance and have the ability to integrate with these applications sitting on premise or in the cloud. So how do you do that, right? So the ability to have a central solution deployed, having them manage your identities in terms of automatically managing the life cycle of the users already helps you achieve a certain level of compliance, because now you're making sure when a user is joining the organization or moving during the time they are at the organization, that they only get the correct or the privileges that they actually do require, right? Now we're talking least privilege, right? A lot of times we see that organizations just give access to users when they request it, so it's on demand, right? If you look at privilege accounts, even worse, right? I need access to a domain controller. Yes, I get an account that has got all the security groups added to that account, right? So any account can become an elevated account in today's world. So you have to have these solutions put in place, so you're making sure that you only provide the access that they actually do require, nothing more, nothing less. You have the ability to run different types of recertification campaigns, having somebody actually attest to people having access to these solutions. So, for example, I know Identity Manager is more a business-driven application than it is an actual IT administration kind of tool. Yes, it makes our lives easier in terms of automation and things like that. But if you look at it, the business knows who are the people that should have access to their resources, right? They are the ones that tells us, I need you to link this entitlement to this role. Okay, so they know that if somebody joins the organization and they're part of sales, they should have access to Salesforce, for example. So when you do create the user, automatically we fulfill that for you, making sure they get the least amount of privileges. When they move to a different role or different location, we have different entitlements linked to that as well. So everything is automated and fulfilled. And when they are, for example, needing access to a privileged credential, they can request it on the Identity Manager platform or PAM, and it will calculate the risk for you. So already you have things put in place to make sure that you're not violating anything and you're still complying to the standards that has been pushed down. And then obviously just taking care of those privileged credentials or doing least delegation on an object level becomes such a critical factor, because which organization doesn't have AD or Azure AD? And if you look at the access that these users have in these environments, you'll be alarmed, because you wouldn't even know if a hacker's in your environment, because there's so many accounts that have so much elevated access, and this creates so much risk within your organization because you're not following a normal principle of just providing least delegation or just the right amount of access for these users. So at the end of the day, these products working together helps you get to that path. But yes, it's a journey. We understand that. So having them put in place one by one and trying to achieve certain standards and meeting certain requirements will definitely help you meet those certain standards that has been pushed down from regulatory compliance standards.
Thank you so much, Bradley. Thank you. So quickly, now, then we'll take two after the next session because we are running out of time. So the first question says, please shed more light on how a typical IAM solution will identify a compromised account or identity and carry out an expected control action. Should I take that again?
That's fine. I think we got it. I don't know, maybe Goodness might also want to add something here, but for me, IAM solutions is not there to pinpoint this is a compromised account, for example. I think it's there to help you not get to that point, right? It's there to prevent that. It's like a preventative measure that you put in place, right? because I have a solution put in place that manages the life cycle of a user and gives him just around the right amount of access, I'm already 5 steps ahead of that, right? So if that credential becomes compromised, what's the worst they can do? When you talk privileged credentials, a different conversation. But then again, I can put certain things in place, like vaulting the credential, having the ability to disable the credential and just provide it in time and just for a specific duration. And if it is checked out, I have insight to what they are doing with it, right? And I can even put stuff like black and white listing of commands, or you can do contextual user behavior and do some recording of the user's behavior on the endpoints. So there's things you can put in place to prevent that from happening, instead of you trying to put a solution in place to find out when it already occurred, because then the damage is done already, right? And you don't know what else has been compromised in your environment. So I think the best answer to that question is basically solutions are there to put in place to actually prevent that from occurring.
So IAM solutions are more of preventive measures to prevent that situation from happening. Thank you, Bradley. So for the second question I'll assign to Goodness. It says, with more people working from home, how can they get into their work stuff safely while still keeping it secure from bad actors?
Yeah, we've talked about this. I mean, a lot. Again, people want to be able to. I mean, we're going to talk about it later. People want to be able to work, and again, work securely. And one of the things that you want to do is focusing again on your identity governance, yourself, your identity. How exactly do you, what are these applications that you are logging onto? What exactly are these resources that you are accessing? You want to be able to put in place and secure your identity as an organization, as a person, so that you don't fall into the compromised state like Bradley just mentioned. So I mean, and that's the reason why you have solutions like your one identity manager solution that are in place, or your PAM solution that helps you to able to access the resources that you want to access, but access it in a secure way, so that you are balancing between usability and security. And just again, I just want to talk a little about that first question. I mean, good question he mentioned, but again, you see, that's why we speak of identity governance as governance. And if you want to look at preventive, corrective, and detective kind of thing and controls you want to put in place, you're speaking with regard to detection kind of control. And you see, with that now, you also have to implement something around identity management, but not under identity governance that helps you to able to feature this kind of thing. Typically, your behavioral analysis and machine learning are some of the things that are being onboarded. Because we talk about the future of identity governance and access management, and we're going to that future where machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to be applied in such a way that we are going to learn the behavioral characteristics of a user the moment when he accesses a particular resource, so that when that behavior changes with a compromised account. So a person is typically logs on and accesses 1, 2, 3, 4 resources. That behavior changes. It's that your IAM solution is able to determine that this is not a typical behavior of how this normal user is supposed to be, and it will flag it as a suspicious compromised account until when found guilty, then that becomes a valid compromised account. So I mean, that's the future. That's the kind of things we'll be looking at, ensuring that we are able to put in place artificial intelligence and machine learning to understand the behavior of how typical users access resources, and then map that into what we have into your IAM solution, and helps you to be able to achieve accessing your resources securely.
Good point there, Goodness.
Thank you, Goodness. Thank you so much. So I believe the person that asked that question has his answer already. So quickly, we'll move to the phase where we'll be talking about the practical approach to identity governance. So identity governance often involves balancing security and usability. So how can organizations maintain a seamless user experience while enforcing strong identity governance? Bradley, would you help us with that?
Just repeat it, please, Elizabeth. I missed a few of it. Just can you go with that?
Okay. Okay, let me repeat. It says identity governance often involves balancing security and usability. So how can organizations maintain a seamless user experience while enforcing strong identity governance? So we are looking for a balance between maintaining a seamless user experience and enforcing strong identity governance.
No, 100%. So Goodness actually touched on some of them now when you made the example of the contextual user behavior, right? So for example, you have the solution does or has some type of intelligence embedded into it, whether it's IGA, PAM, or active roles, for example. All of these things has a specific way of doing things, right? So for example, let's look at Identity Manager. So a user gets created, right? And they have the ability to manage their own requests on the portal. We give them the access that they're only allowed to have, right? So obviously administrators will have different types of access. But a normal typical user will log into the portal trying to request access to an application, a desktop application, whatever the case might be. The application already does a calculation for you in the background, right? So it already says, first of all, Bradley's logging into the system. He's not allowed to have access to this types of resources or this types of roles. So it won't even populate into the system, right? Only unless there's exceptions made and somebody actually puts that in like an administrator and allows the user to actually gain access to certain things like that. So let's say, for example, the user goes into the application and tries to request access to the application or role, and the system does the calculation for you. So if it goes and kicks off a workflow for someone to approve, the intelligence that sits behind it says that this user might be having too much privileges, and it pushes up the user's risk score. So already when the approver gets the request to approve or either perform whatever decision they want to do, they can already decide based on the information provided by the application that this user should get this access or not, right? Because the application is telling you, okay, if you approve this access, this user will have 70%. The risk score will increase by 70%. So this makes sure that you're saying to yourself, okay, this user will become an elevated user, meaning that they have too much access within the system. Or, for example, you create something like SOD policies. In the background, it tells you if a user has accounts payable and accounts receivable, it's violating a specific policy. You do not want to have something like it. Why should a user have accounts payable and accounts receivable? That means I can pay myself and get away with it, right? So things like that get put in place to make sure you're still continuing achieving continuous governance and compliance. And then you have scheduled reports that can run. Recertification campaigns, making sure that users do not have access to certain applications. And if they do, someone is actually attesting to it, right? You're making sure that somebody is held responsible in terms of a business resource owner or a security officer, making sure that they are attesting to somebody having access to that application. Another example that I actually like is they call it challenge role loss removal. If you think about how many users in organizations shift to different job roles, right? They typically still need to do handover. And handover requires them to have access to a role that they previously had and the new role that they're going to have. So that means I'm going to have, for example, I'm moving to sales to IT. I'm going to have the sales role and I'm going to have the IT role because I need to do handover and I still need access to that system. But everything is in the system. Everything is captured and audited. So if somebody does come and ask for why does this user have too much access or it's violating a policy, there is proof in the system and everything is automated. Everything goes through an approval workflow. So already when somebody needs to approve that, they know, okay, the reason why Bradley requires a secondary role is because they are moving to a different job role. And this is why they need this access to the primary role just to do the handover. There's a lot of things that you can talk about, like Goodness mentioned, the contextual user behavior, right? Making sure that if this user is actually who they say they are, if the risk score increases and we mark the user as a high-risk user, we can disable that user in the one login directory. And in that SSO session, you can terminate the access across the board. So you're being proactive, right? You're making sure that if the user is flagged, you should not have access to any other application until we investigate what happened. Or if it's marked as medium, just change the login flow, present him with a different authentication factor like OTP or facial recognition for biometrics or whatever the case might be. So those are types of things that we put in place to make it more user-friendly, seamless, and everything happens in the background, but does not affect the user's ability to interact with the system.
So much, Bradley. Thank you for your answer. So we'll be moving to goodness. We are moving fast now because our time is fast. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so do you want me to take the question again?
No, I think I got the question. So I think just very briefly, and Bradley has touched about it, balancing usability and security, and that's one of the things we always talk to security consultants about, because as a security consultant and even as a security a champion for your organization, I mean, you are there for security, but again, the business is not the you are trying to enable the business, because security is support the business, not the other way around. You're not leading the business. The business leads, security is supporting you. So at every point in time, the whole idea is when going out to go and shop for solutions. For example, today I want to shop for an IAM solution, for example. One of the things that should be at the back of your mind is, will my IAM solution fit seamlessly into my business, or will it cause further havoc for me in my business? Yes, I want to be able to protect vendors. For example, today I have resources in-house. I have servers in-house that I want my vendors. I have people who are vendors who log on externally to access those resources in-house. The question we will be asking is, how can those vendors still be able to log on, carry out their work, but in a secure manner? If the IAM solution is preventing the user friendliness of the people of the business, that has affected it. At the end of the day, we're not meeting the security objectives. The security objectives are supposed to be aligned to the business objectives of the organization, and that's one of the things that should be at the back of your mind. In One Identity, we have a checklist when going out for. I mean, without even you have a checklist for looking at the for a typical IAM solution. Where typically we see, I mean, that's a trend for organizations when they want to go out, they don't usually have a checklist for an IAM solution, or we want to buy a solution that's going to help us to manage user identities. Let me have a checklist without having to have a checklist for a particular vendor. Let me just have a checklist for a typical IAM solution. I will use that IAM solution checklist to benchmark every other vendor that you have. One Identity helps you through that journey. They help you to carry out that particular provide that kind of checklist, where you can use that to carry out assessments of the different vendors that you have. And of course, at the end of the day, One Identity always comes up tops, because we fit into, or we check all the boxes for a typical user-friendly IAM solution that you have, because that again is the goal of implementing security, to be able to meet business objectives. So balancing that is very key when implementing identity and access management solutions.
Thank you so much, goodness. And quickly, to round off the session, I'd ask, how can organizations implement continuous monitoring and adaptive access controls to ensure proper identity governance? Like in 2 minutes, how can organizations practically implement continuous monitoring and adaptive access control to ensure proper identity governance?
I think it talks also. I think it also talks back to some of the points we just raised now in your previous question, right? Having things like running scheduled in IGA, for example, recertification campaigns, having an SOD policy put in place. So every time something happens, it triggers an event, it triggers an alert, or it triggers a rule that fires off to do SNMP traps or an email notification for someone to actually acknowledge and perform a decision based on what that exception or what that violation was. So those things are out of the box available for solutions like Identity Manager that can help you achieve continuous governance and compliance. And this can be enforced to your application sitting on-prem or in the cloud, and making sure that the users have the correct access all the time. So even if they're moving in different locations, different job titles, automatically they get assigned the roles that they require. If they need to request access, like I said, the calculation is made in the background if they are violating anything, if they're having too much access, and people actually attesting or approving that access if need be. So the systems is becoming very user-friendly in terms of helping the users make the decisions much more easier, as well as looking at PAM. where we actually gather the user's behavior on the endpoint and create a baseline of the user's activity so we can actually pinpoint what is normal and what is abnormal. So if something does happen, again, we can either terminate the session or you can send an alert and someone can log on to actually manually terminate the session. So you creating that preventative measure and being proactive, or even just adding a blacklisted command that doesn't allow them to type it in, for example, on a Linux terminal, and you won't allow them to actually type that command in or drop a database on a SQL database. So things like that get put in place quickly and help you obviously achieve that continuous governance and preventive controls. There's a lot of other things, but like you said, we're running out of time.
Thank you, Bradley. Goodness, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I mean, very briefly and lastly, identity governance it's not a solution. It's not a product, sorry. It's a solution. It's a journey. It does not end in 1 year. We have had so many organizations who say they have implemented identity and access management solution products, and they have implemented it, and you have implemented it within a month or two. And from my experience, I know that these things they don't just happen like that. They don't just get implemented in a month or two. It's something that's beyond just the product deployment. The process that has to be in place and the governance around user identities will take considerable amount of time, because people will now have to start adopting to what is now the new normal as a way of managing the identities. So because it is a journey, organizations should begin to take notice of it. And by organizations, I'm not just talking about the chief security officer or the chief information office security officer. I'm talking about just about every single person that exists within the organization, because your identity is one of the most valuable things that you can hold. If it is compromised, that means you as an individual is compromised. Your identity is more important than any of the resources that you have. It's more important than your system, the laptop you're holding, even the server you're holding. Because the moment when you as a person, you are compromised, your application identity is compromised, your device identities are compromised, your entire organization has an issue. So organizations should continue. I mean, it's a continuous effort. It's not something that you just start and stop within 2-3 months. It's something that is going to continue. It's a journey. And we believe that working with organizations like One Identity, you'll be able to help to be able to achieve your identity and access management objectives is aligned to what the business objectives are.
Thank you, Goodness. Thank you so much. So finally, I'll read the last question I have here. It says, are there rules that companies have to follow to make sure they are using our personal information in the right way? How do they follow these rules when things keep changing? So let Bradley please help us with that, and from there we'll take final notes from Goodness and Bradley.
So in terms of data that gets kept in solutions such as Identity Manager, we have to also comply, right? For example, with the POPIA Act. So from an organization standpoint, the information that, for example, if we integrate with your HR system, because that's how we actually pull information. So that information that we get is either it's existing somewhere or somebody actually put it in. So from a schema standpoint, when we create the attributes that we want to capture information on, we have to comply. So if there's information that we're not allowed to capture, it won't be available. So in terms of meeting that requirement, the information we pull is just the information we need to create the account. So this typically includes like your name, your surname, the location, the job role, the cost center, for example, things like that. And that provisions your account. And we do not need to capture things like your ID number or credit card details or whatever the case might be. So that's his sensitive information. And if we are violating anything, then we do not need to capture it at all. We can create an identity on behalf of certain information that we just pull from your HR system or CSV file, or you putting it in manually in the Identity Manager application. PAM even more less, because that is basically just having a user account where we can integrate with external federation systems, or you're just creating it locally or a different directory server, and we just pull that account in and we give you access to the PAM solution and we manage the credential. So at the end of the day, we do comply with those standards in that way.
Okay, thank you, Bradley. Goodness, do you have any words and do you have final notes for us? Are you there, Goodness?
I think you lost connection, Elizabeth.
I think he lost connection. So while we are waiting for Goodness to come, Bradley, do you have final words for us, like a conclusion to everything we've been speaking about?
Yeah, for me personally, during my few years, okay, it's a number of years, but in the industry, it's very crucial to have an IAM solution because it does become a core application within your organization, but it is something that you need to implement properly and have proper things put in place to have this project deployed. Like Goodness said, it is a journey. Even the whole IAM journey in terms of PAM, in terms of governance and access management, all of them come together. I view it as a suite because when you deploy the solution, it ends up talking to another product, and that provides an additional value. And that's where, like I said in the beginning, that's actually where the values do lie in terms of unification and converged platforms. So when you do put in solutions in place, have the ability to grow with the solution and adapt with the solution and mature with the solution, it does add a lot of value to companies and organizations, and it does definitely help you meet organization standards, and it even does help you save on your cyber insurance. So that is a big thing out there if you have these solutions in place.
Yeah, thank you, Bradley. Goodness, your final words. Are you here?
Yeah, I would have loved my final words to just be, let's end here and go home. But I think it has to be more better than that.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have talked a lot about this. Digital identities have evolved over time. That's just the truth. I mean, identities have evolved. We talked about. I mean, there's a time when we have there's a time when identities were never managed because there was no internet. There was a time when it was centralized. When we traditional IAM solutions, we have gone to when identities we now have federated identities. We now have user-centric identities. I mean, there will be a time when we'll start to have self-sovereign identity management, where users will begin to own their identities and be able to self-manage it. We're going to see things like your blockchain and all of that's going to begin to tokenize people's identities. But the truth is that, however, identities are going to go, digital identities are going to go. What we know is that organizations will always, I mean, the future, we're talking about the future of identity, access, management, and governance. We know that it is going to continue to evolve. It is not going to stop now. It's going to evolve. It's going to become more and more better. It's going to become more and more complex.
I agree. It's going to get better and it's going to become more complex because the technological landscape is evolving. New threats are popping in daily and new solutions are popping in daily as well. So if you have any other questions, you can send us an email, a follow-up email on your registration mail. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Goodness. Thank you, Bradley. I'm very sure we had a great time. We learned. The session was really informative. And then we'll have the session uploaded on YouTube so you can always go back to watch in case you missed anything. Thank you so much. Peter, do you have final words for us?
You said, Peter. Technology gets the better of us.
I got so engrossed in listening to you guys that I didn't know I was muted. So everyone, thank you very much for your time. It's critical that you now start to look more into your identity. You know, you want to start to in making decisions in business, you need to consider the criticality of the identity of the individuals, the identity of the applications, the identity of the environment, and the identity of the entire ecosystem. So identity now is the big concern for organizations and individuals. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and then we'll look forward to receiving your questions and addressing them in due time. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Everyone, cheers.